Good afternoon, Ms. Iyer.
Good
Welcome
afternoon.
to Health Education Library for People. It's a pleasure having you as usual. And today's talk on applications of NLP part 5. Could you just tell us a brief of what you would be talking in your lecture today?
Okay, so this is the part 5 of the series. In the first 4 parts, we've covered the basics of NLP in terms of how do we do breath work and pacing with another person that we are doing NLP with. Today, we'll specifically look at what is termed as the Milton model, which is one of the very primary models of NLP. It includes several language patterns which can be used to induce a hypnotic trance state into the person that you're working with, so that you can give suggestions which are useful for the person. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So we've got some old timers back here, so that's nice to give some continuity. Just to catch up for the rest of us, we are on part 5 of this series. Like you asked earlier, NLP stands for Neuro-linguistic programming. So by nature, it deals with the way our brain is programmed. All our brains are programmed through our schooling, parents, all the education that we've received, all the work experience, all the life experiences we've had. All of it tends to program our mind to respond in certain ways to certain kinds of people, certain kinds of situation, or any other stimuli. NLP primarily looks at how do we work with that particular programming in a way that we can shift the programming that is not specifically healthy for us. There is a lot of conditioning, a lot of programming which is great for us. So, for example, if you're programmed to wake up and brush our teeth first thing in the morning, that is an example of programming, but that's healthy for us. We don't really need to change it around. But there are several other aspects of programming which may or may not be healthy, and those are things we can work on through various tools of NLP. So, as a prelude to what we will do today, we had 4 parts before this. The first part was the very basics of NLP, which primarily starts with what we call pacing. So if you're using NLP with someone else, if you're using it with NLP, all you need to do is be present with yourself completely. But if you're using it with someone else, it is important that we pace with the person. So pacing would mean that we try and match the speed of breath of the other person to start with. So observe what is called the micro muscle movements of the person. How do the shoulders fall and rise with every breath? Try and match the pace of that. Try and eventually also pace with the person's body language. So if the person happens to be sitting erect and straight in a chair, very alert, try and mirror the body language as much as possible so that you're in sync with the person physiologically. Pacing also extends to trying to mirror the voice level, the speed, the rate of speech, and to some degree emotionally pace the person. So if you know, for example, if you can sense that the other person is sad or feeling agitated, try and understand that feeling, be with that feeling without being dragged into it, because our intention to pace is to then lead the person into a better state. So we need to be aware that the other person is agitated but not get carried away into the agitation. The idea is understand the state, and then slowly, once you're in sync, when you're in pace with the person, shift your space. So suddenly you become calm, you become peaceful, and eventually, because you're mirroring the person will also start following you and become calm and peaceful, or whatever is the state that you're trying to lead the person into. Right? So that is pacing and leading. Part 2, we spoke about the representational systems that are used in NLP. Although the rep systems are, in a way, the vehicle of NLP. So all of us have 5 sense organs. So we have sight and sound and touch and feel and taste. And all of these are used as vehicles to store memory. Right? So if I have to ask you about, think of the first minute that you remember when you woke up this morning, right? Immediately when you woke up. So some of us would remember the visual of our bed, perhaps the bedroom, maybe we can remember the print on the bed sheet. Some of us might perhaps remember the smell of tea that's brewing in the kitchen when you woke up. Some of you might remember a certain taste of the first thing that was presented to you in the morning. So all our sense organs are vehicles, representational systems, which help us store memory, and all of these can be used in the language patterns of NLP to provoke or invoke certain memories and then shift those memories as well. So in the next part, the third part, we spoke about swish pattern, where we use the visual representational system, the system of sight, where we remember colors, we remember brightness, dullness, we remember movement of a certain a situation, and we look at changing those representational systems, modifying the representational systems so that we are able to break association with certain memories. So let's say if I have a memory of an accident where let's say a car happened to be speeding and hit a tree, my memory perhaps is stored in the form of a very colorful visual, where I remember the color of the leaves and the color of the car and the seats, and I remember the movement of the car hitting the tree. The representational systems that are active for me are the speed, the pace of the car, the colors, the movement. Using something called the swish pattern, we can shift that association. So I will perhaps still intellectually remember the accident after using the swish pattern, but the impact of it will no longer be there, because I can shift the memory from being very vivid in terms of remembering the color of the tree and the car and all of that, into making it a faded, dull, black and white image, which is a frozen frame. And because I've changed the modalities of that visual, it no longer has an impact on me. Right? So there are several other representational systems which can be used through various patterns of NLP in similar ways. In the last part, we spoke about what is called the meta model. Right? The word today will carry forward from there. There's a slight distinction between what is called the meta model and the Milton model. So meta model was the first model of NLP. So Richard Bandler and John Grinder, who founded the idea of NLP, were modeling a person called, the very first people, they've modeled several people, but the very first attempt that they did was with a person called Milton Erickson. He is, in a way, considered the father of hypnotherapy, the clinical side of hypnotherapy. So Milton Erickson was a qualified doctor, and he had overcome several challenges in his own life. He was afflicted with polio, and he overcame all of that to become a doctor, and then he started practicing medicine. But eventually, over the years, his practice moved more into the therapeutic part of medicine, what he termed as storytelling, but it was really hypnotherapy in one sense. So meta model is slightly different in the sense meta model looks at very specific usage of language. Milton model technically is meta model reversed. Right? So for those of us who remember the meta model in the last lecture, in meta model we try and address a specific language pattern which comes up from a person and try and shift that. Right? So for example, if I come to you and tell you that, you know, I'm really terrible at accounting, I really can't manage my own taxes. Right? So that there is a pattern that's reflecting somewhere. There is a belief in me that says that I can't handle numbers, and in a situation where I have to handle numbers, which could mean bank documents or accounting or any of that, somewhere I feel helpless, and therefore I don't address the situation as well as I possibly could, simply because there's a belief in my head that says numbers and me don't go well. Right? So when I present a statement to you such as, I suck at accounting and I know I can never manage this on my own, there is an opportunity for you to use that meta model by addressing my violation of the model. I've said that I will never be able to handle it. So that's a negative example that I've presented. You can present a positive challenge using the meta model and say that, okay, can we give an example, any of us? I'm really bad at accounting. Challenge me.
What part of accounting bothers you?
Okay. Yes, that's one way of addressing the specificity. So instead of dwelling into saying, oh, are you really so bad at it? He brings me up into a solution-oriented mode by asking a question that says, what part of it is challenging? Right? Another option to tackle the same thing would be to say, what about a situation where you have handled accounting really well? If you happen to know me, you could possibly even remind me of a specific instance where you say, remember you were the treasurer of the road track club and you used to handle accounts? Right? You can do that if you know the person well. But if you do not know the person well, the question that he posed would work perfectly well. So you don't really need to know a person in order to be able to use the meta model or any other model of NLP. It's very conversational in nature, and therefore it can happen on the go. It could be a person you meet on the street. It could be sometimes a waiter in a coffee shop that you're having a conversation with, right? So the meta model works at specific instances. So for you to be able to use the meta model, I should be able to present a violation of it, which means I present a belief and you can counter it with a positive example. So if I present a belief that, I served you tea and snacks and you didn't have it, you must really hate my cooking. Right? That's a negative belief that I come up with. I've made some random association saying I presented you snacks, you didn't have it. Therefore, it must be something to do with my cooking. Those two may not be linked at all, but in my mind I've linked it. Right? So you can present a positive challenge there, but the challenge is to that specific instance where I've said you don't like my snacks. Right? So you can offer a positive challenge and say, if I were to like your cooking, does it necessarily mean I have to have these snacks now? Right? You're presenting a positive challenge, and then that rattles my belief because I say, okay, maybe there is a possibility that he likes my cooking, but he's simply not hungry now. Right? So it challenges my belief. I may not respond immediately to a model, but somewhere in my head the pattern is broken, and therefore I'm forced to address my belief again. So any kind of unhealthy belief that's presented can be challenged using the meta model. So going on to the Milton model, it's similar, but in foundation, Milton model is in a way the reversal of the meta model, in the sense Milton model doesn't need any specific instances. It works with vagueness. Meta model latches onto a specific example and works with it. Right? So we might remember the base that we spoke about the last time, that the map is not the territory. Right? The map is not the territory is one of the foundational principles of NLP. What it says is, if you have to broaden the analogy, if we look at an atlas and there are several maps, right? So if there's a map of India on the atlas, the map does not reflect the territory really. It reflects the scale. So we might get a general idea of the shape of India and where the rivers run and which state is where. But that does not mean we know what exactly is in the state or in the rivers, or are the rivers running dry or are they full in the current season. We have no idea. The map is not the territory, it's just a map. Right? Similarly, therefore, our beliefs are not our persona. Right? We present our beliefs in every conversation that we have, whether it's a sales call to a client or whether it's talking to a friend or having a dinner conversation with our family. We present our beliefs all the time, unconsciously in our conversation. So when we tell our child that don't talk to strangers, I'm presenting my belief that strangers are dangerous and therefore you should not talk, right? So we constantly keep presenting our beliefs, but the belief may not be the reality. It's just my belief. It happens to be a part of my persona. I've chosen to inculcate it either because my parents told me or because my experience in life says so, but it doesn't always have to be true. So the models are are representation of the world, but they're not in reality the world. And NLP works on the principle that we can keep changing that representation so that we are free to look at the world afresh in every moment. So we don't respond out of habit, we respond out of choice in every moment. So Milton model is, as we said, named after Milton Erickson, and he devised Milton didn't himself document what he did as a part of his therapeutic sessions. It's largely Bandler and Grinder who did that. What Milton would do is simply people would walk into his clinic with problems, and the problems could be physical or emotional or mental. Some people would walk in with a back pain, and some would walk in with emotional problems, some would walk in with mental issues. And all Milton would do is have conversations with them. He did not use any physical medicines, no chemicals injected. All he did was talk. A lot of times he told stories. But at the end of that session, people would walk out healed. So that is the genius that Bandler and Grinder were trying to replicate. They were trying to figure out what happens in this guy's clinic that people walk out healed, where all he seems to be doing is telling stories. Right? So that's what they were trying to work out. So Milton model was born out of that. What they realized was what he seemed to be doing in his clinic was could be termed hypnosis. However, Ericksonian hypnosis is slightly different from the regular hypnosis that we hear about otherwise. Traditional hypnosis requires that a person is in a trance. Right? Whether we use it for past life regression or we use it for any kind of auto-suggestions and healing, it requires that the person is completely in an absolute relaxed state, very often lying down on a couch or in a mode that the body cannot really move. He cannot participate in a conversation. Right? He may be able to listen to you, but cannot really participate in a conversation. And therefore, traditional hypnosis, for it to be strong enough, it uses a lot of suggestions and incantations. So typically, we would have a procedure, a script that we follow when we are putting a person into a state of hypnosis. Right? Ericksonian hypnosis, or what we use in all of the Milton models, is not a process of putting the person into an unconscious state. The person very much remains in a conscious state, is having a conversation with you, right? All you're doing is putting the person in a state of what we may call a mild trance, right? It is a state where you're absolutely pacing with the person, which means you're in complete unconscious rapport, right? So if I'm talking to you, I'm very aware of your breath, your body language, your state of mind perhaps from whatever I can glean from your body language, and I'm trying to mirror that, pace with you, match my breath with you, in the process build unconscious rapport for a few minutes, and then in that state of rapport induce suggestions which tackle the problem that I'm trying to shift. Right? So the conversation is very much going on. The person doesn't realize you're doing anything to him or her. You don't need the person to lie down or any of that, and which is why Ericksonian hypnosis is also called conversational hypnosis. It happens as a part of a regular conversation. The person need not know what happened at all, right? But there is a possibility by the trance that you create, by the rapport that you create, that you can induce suggestions for healing, right? So this is the crux of what we are going to be talking about. What are the kinds of language patterns that are used in the Milton model? We spoke about a few of them in the meta model as well. The difference, as I said, is in the meta model, you wait for a belief to come up and you address that specific belief. This is something that you can keep doing on and off in regular conversations. You don't have to wait for an opportunity. So, for example, if you are opening a lecture in a college, or let's say you're talking to your son about something that you want to have a conversation about. So let's say you want to tell your son that he should probably try and invest in a house now. It's time that he starts looking at financial planning seriously. Okay? In that sort of a conversation, you don't have to wait for a belief to come up. You can start the conversation by what is called the mind reading technique. Now, here mind reading is not really about guessing what is in the other person's mind, but making an assumption. Right? So, if I'm talking to my son, I could possibly start off with a mind read that says, I know you're excited to buy your own house and that you're excited to have this conversation about how to start planning for it. Right? So, I'm not really waiting to figure out is he even wanting to have that conversation. I directly start with a mind read that says, I know you want this. And in that process of saying, I know you want this, I've already put in a suggestion that he does want it, and therefore he begins with a belief that, okay, he wants to listen to whatever you have to say, and therefore the conversation is much easier. Right? So that's called mind read. Remember, in this case, the mind read is not about the guesswork of what is really in the person's mind.
Right. So is it a sort of a leading in?
Yeah. Okay. You're leading him through the mind read. The mind read part of it is because you would presuppose the whatever is the suggestion that you're giving, you will tag it with saying, I know that, right? I understand, or I can see that you're very curious about hearing this talk. Right? So you're using the mind read in the sense that you're actually applying it to the other person, but the person has not really given you any reason to do so. Now, with any language pattern, this applies for meta model as well, but very specific for Milton models particularly to work. It is important that any suggestion that you give in NLP, one, it needs to be given in a state of unconscious rapport, right? Which means you should be pacing with the person that you're working with. You should be in unconscious rapport, in sync with the person. And second, and a very important thing, is usually most of these suggestions are given in a downward tone, right? So your voice is not going up, or it's not a question mark, it's not a flat tone, it's a downward tone, right? So it's like saying, I know all of you are curious to learn about NLP. The voice goes down towards the end of the sentence, right? So that's typically the tone in which the suggestions are given. So, but of course, the first assumption is build unconscious rapport. Pace with the person for a few minutes, and then start using any of these techniques. So, mind read is one very easy, simple, popular one that can be used. And mind read works beautifully even if you're working with multiple people at a time. So, even if you're handling a classroom of 60 students, right, you can start with a mind read that says, I know all of you are curious to learn more geometry today. They may or may not be, they probably have a few other things happening in my mind, but the very fact that you lower your tone and you say that in unconscious rapport with the class as a whole does lead them into a state where they are more receptive to it. Okay? So, mind read is a very common and easy technique to follow. Okay. The next one is modal operators. Even in the meta model, we spoke about modal operators coming up as a part of beliefs. So, for example, I might have a belief that says, let's say, vegetarian food is the only thing that is good for health, or I must exercise every day if I have to control my weight. Right? The fact that I use a modal operator, an auxiliary verb, which says I should, or I must, or I ought to. Right? I must exercise every day to cut down my weight. I should be there on time for the meeting, otherwise the client will not give me business. So there are these shoulds and musts in my head which are a belief, some of which may be healthy, some of which may be hampering me. So if I go into a meeting with the belief that I should be there on time, else I will not make a good impression on the client, even if I happen to be 2 minutes late, somewhere I'm going to enter the meeting very disturbed because I believe I should be on time and I'm not. Right? So those are beliefs which can sometimes lead us into trouble. So in meta model, you wait for that belief to come up and then you present it with a positive challenge. So in meta model, you would say, if I say I should reach there on time, else I will not get that business, you might present me with a challenge and say that, what do you think could happen if you enter 5 minutes late? Right? And then I'm forced to think about the opportunity that is presented 5 minutes late instead of getting stuck with my belief that I am late. In the Milton model, as we said, we don't wait for specific instances. Milton model, you can use a modal operator to again feed a belief. So it could simply be about saying that there are so many of us sitting in this room, and because we are 15 minutes into the lecture, by now all of you must be feeling immersed into the topic. Right? So all you're doing is using the context and saying, you must be feeling good about this. Right? Or let's say if I'm trying to sell you a house, I could possibly say, now that you've seen the sample flats, I'm sure you're really keen to buy this property. I'm feeding the modal operator, so I'm using all the should and the must and the ought to and will do, would do, can do, all of that. But then I'm feeding it in as a belief, not really waiting for you to present your point of view. Rather, I'm trying to induce my perspective or my desired outcome as a belief into you. So those are modal operators. Cause and effect is a very, again, a simple model that can be used. Cause and effect would primarily mean that you start off with a statement of fact, right, which can be picked up from the context, and in the second statement you try and induce the feeling that you are trying to get for that particular person. So for example, you're sitting there with that lovely shawl wrapped around you, feeling really warm, and I'm sure you're absorbing all the things that are coming your way really well. Right? So the first statement was a statement of fact. She is sitting there with a shawl wrapped around her, and because you're sitting there with a shawl wrapped around you, you're able to get everything that I'm saying to you. Right? So there is a cause and there is an effect. Sometimes that cause and effect can spill into a complex equivalence, in the sense that more often than not, if in the early times, if you're not very practiced in it, you might want to use a very visible cause and effect. So because you're sitting on this chair with your feet on the ground, you're feeling completely relaxed and at ease. Right? So there is some amount of correlation directly, because there is a comfortable chair, you're feeling at ease, there is some rationality to it. But sometimes once you get more practiced with it and you know that you've got good unconscious rapport with the person, you can get into a complex equivalence where you can have absolutely random cause and effects. Right? So there's a bird flying out in the sky and all of us are feeling absolutely comfortable and relaxed and absorbing everything that's coming your way. So there's no relation with the bird and this thing, but I could use anything really. But that kind of complex equivalence works if you know you're in absolute rapport. Right? You know you're in complete rapport with the person, which means the person is really in a state of trance. You will know it, that rapport can be noticed when you know that the person is actually shifting with every shift of your body language. Right? So if you want to test it,
you should be sure that it is synchronized.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it might work otherwise if you use the right tone, but then you're not too sure, and in that process you might get a little rattled. Right? So if you want, you can check for unconscious rapport first. The easiest check for unconscious rapport is you pace the person, you match the breath of the person, the sound and all of that, and after a little while try and shift your body language. If that person also shifts, you know that there is rapport. Whether the person notices or not is not really the point here. Right? So you can shift anything. Body language is the easiest thing to see. Sometimes you might experiment with shifting your breath. So if you were breathing at a certain pace, try and slow it down or try and increase it and see if the person also reciprocates. Right? So if that happens, you know that the rapport is built. Then anything that you put in will go in as a suggestion. Right? But if you're not sure, then the early days of practice, it's easier to do a direct cause and effect. Direct cause and effect is to use something in the environment. It could be as simple as saying the walls are white and therefore you're feeling peaceful. Something which is present in the environment, which can be factually verified for you to be able to handle it. Okay. So that's a direct cause and effect. Complex equivalence is where, as I said, it is still cause and effect, but it may not be as direct. We do use it very often, like in traditional hypnosis, for example, we often say, right, breathe in and breathe out, and with every breath that you exhale, you go deeper and you feel more and more relaxed. Now, there's nothing to, I mean, the breath has nothing to do with relaxation. They're really two different body processes.
How they use that staircase, is it the same? Staircase model?
Yes, yeah, that's used as an analogy. Yeah, as you go down every step, you feel more and more relaxed, you go deeper. Right? That is complex equivalence in the sense stairs, they have nothing to do with relaxation. Right? But then because you're in that state of rapport, you're able to create relaxation. Right? So it's something that it's not really a new technique in the sense all of us use it unconsciously very often. It's something that can be used very powerfully if you're doing it consciously. So if you're building rapport with the person and then inducing one of these models, it works really beautifully. And the beauty of Milton model or even the meta model is the person that you're having a conversation with doesn't know it at all. He or she has no idea that the person has benefited from that conversation. It's just that later, sometime, probably later in the day or sometimes even a few months later, the person suddenly realizes, oh, I used to be like that, now I'm like this. So there has been a positive change. So the realization may or may not be immediate, but there is a possibility that we can change lives along the way. So that's complex equivalence. Then there is what are called the universal quantifiers. Quantifiers in the sense you use any kind of a measurement, but you universalize the results. So as a doctor, if there is a patient who's worried and you're trying to tell the person to relax, you can say that all your reports tell me that you're in great health. Right? So all your report is the quantifier that you've used, and you've universalized it and said that you're in stable health. Now, of course, remember that when you're using any of these, the point is not to give wrong information. So if the person is not in steady health, you would need to say that also. But the idea is to get the person into a state of relaxation. So you can, of course, tell the person that all your reports indicate that you're in great health. All we need to work on is perhaps control our sugar levels. Right? You're zeroing in on a specific point, but before that you've built in a state of receptivity. The person feels that, okay, whatever is coming in can be worked upon now. If you directly go into the point of saying, oh, your sugar levels are terribly high, then there is a state of panic, whereas here you've said everything else is fine, now there's this one little area that we can work on.
Right? That is why when doctor comes on around with that, the first thing they ask,
yeah. Well, if the answer is positive, yes, you can work on, build on that, and that always helps. Yes. Okay. So, universal quantifiers can also be used in random ways. It can, in fact, get mixed with complex equivalence sometimes. In reality, we use all the patterns mixed up. So, it's just that when we learn it, it's easier to deal with them one at a time.
We use it unknowingly, but we don't know the exact details.
Yeah. And it helps, when learning it, it helps to have this distinction, because it also helps us understand the minor points where we can go wrong. Very often we are in a state of rapport with another person unconsciously without trying for it, and then we feed in a negative suggestion. Very often, parents and children happens all the time. You know, the neighbor's kid is so good at maths, if you don't catch up, you know what's going to happen, right? So, there is often a lot of negative suggestion that tends to get filled in. Here, the idea is to try and make sure you get in the positive suggestions. So universal quantifiers, yeah, so things like all the reports tell me that you're in great health, or every time I look at the clock, I remember what is the value of time. Okay? Every step that you take on the road makes you fitter. So you're using a quantifier, but at the same time leading the quantifier into a suggestion of the state of being that you want the person to be in. Then there are presuppositions. Presuppositions are where you're making an assumption, but it's a positive assumption that you're trying to feed into the person. So let's say you're trying to train somebody to be a good salesperson for you. You could feed in a suggestion that, do you realize you're already a master salesperson? Right? You're already there. So the feeding that's going in is, yeah, I'm already there. All I need to do is start utilizing my skills. Okay? So any kind of a presupposition. So if there's a child who's having difficulty in learning a particular language, it could be simply about saying that, do you realize you already have, do you realize your brain cells already have the capability to learn new languages easily? You've learned so many languages till now, right? So you're using a presupposition that says the brain cells already know how to learn a language. You can mix it with a cause and effect saying you've already learned so many languages in the past, and then lead it to a new belief that now this is a new language and I know that you're very curious to learn this new one. So you can mix and match a lot of these models at the same time. Right? So those are presuppositions. The important thing is we use presuppositions all the time, but very often in a negative way. Right? Right? All of us know policemen are corrupt.
Yeah.
Right? That's a presupposition coming up, but then it's negative, and because we keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it at a mass level, somewhere that belief tends to be held in the collective consciousness. So there is a possibility of a reversal if you're able to slowly change that belief as well. And then of course there are unspecified verbs. Like I said, Milton model works with vagueness. It doesn't really look for specificity. So therefore you could use any available information in the environment and then feed in a suggestion that needs to be fed in, right? So we just saw the door open and somebody walked in, and that makes all of us even more curious to understand what's coming next. Okay? Now that makes that is a very vague thing. Now that could include somebody walking in, or somebody ringing a doorbell, or hearing a car honk on the road. Could be anything, and that makes us feel whatever we're feeling. Right? So those are several of the language patterns. There are a few others as well, but they are in a way subtypes of these. As I said, in reality, it works as a mix and match. It's very rare that we would use only one specific pattern. Typically, one leads to another. But yeah, they are very powerful if you use them in the right state of trance. And trust me, that state of trance is easy to get into. We get into it all the time. Right? It could, even if you're traveling in a local train and you happen to be observing somebody, let's say you happen to be observing one of those small guys who sing with that stone, right? You could go into a state of unconscious rapport with them simply by watching them, because in watching them, in enjoying the rhythm of the song that they sing, there is rapport that's built, right? So we often are led by others unconsciously. So if the child there happens to be feeling very nice and chirpy, somewhere you get off at the next station feeling nice and chirpy, not knowing why you're feeling good about it, right? Or sometimes you may be sitting next to somebody who happens to be having a fight over the phone, and somewhere you've been listening to that conversation and you end up feeling very tired and drained when you get off at your stop, because you have been in unconscious rapport with that person and you've let yourself be led by that person. The principle behind NLP is, yes, get into unconscious rapport, but you lead. You don't get led by the person, right? Except the only time we get led is when we are using pacing and the technique of pacing for learning, right? So if there is a master speaker speaking on a particular topic and you want to be like that person, in that case you let yourself be led. You pace the person, which means you match the breath, you try and match the body language and all of that, and then let yourself be swiveled by that person's change of movement, by that person's change of voice, speed, all of that, right? But that's done only when we are trying to learn or model another person, right? And that other person could be a doctor, it could be a speaker, it could be a cook, a singer, anybody. Right? At all other times, especially when you're using any NLP pattern, it is very important that we lead. Don't let yourself be led, which means we pace, check if the pacing is working, which is a simple shift of body language, a shift of breath, and see if the other person follows it soon enough. And then we can use any of these language patterns. You can in fact mix Meta model and Milton model and work with it together. Yes?
My understanding is that in NLP, you educate yourself, but what you are talking all the time is that you are trying to condition the person.
It can be used both ways. You can use Milton model for internal dialogues as well. The initial practice, of course, happens with internal dialogues. You wouldn't want to be experimenting with someone else. But if there is an opportunity to help, why not? And trust me, a lot of times it helps to practice it conversationally in a day-to-day context with random people. It doesn't have to be a serious conversation with someone you know. It could be, you know, a waiter or a, yeah, it could be a someone that you're buying a ticket from or anybody. There are opportunities available to shift beliefs wherever you think they are. It's just a matter of a choice to use them constantly. Because pacing comes with a certain amount of practice. Beyond a point, you start getting into unconscious rapport with any environment you walk in. But then the initial few days, it helps to pace with anybody and everybody that you can find the opportunity for.
And it is not a manipulative.
Yeah.
It is a healthy.
Yeah. It could simply be about saying, you're feeling good today. Right? We're not trying to condition in terms of shifting that person's belief or anything. You don't have to know the person at all. It's simply about leaving that person with a great feeling. Yeah. So it could simply be about chatting with a traffic cop and saying, you're having a great day today. It could simply be that. It's just that one little suggestion that's gone in. It's not a dramatic shift of belief or manipulation or anything of that sort, but that opportunity lies in every moment. Okay? And the power of the Milton model is in being able to induce positive beliefs. We induce negative beliefs all the time, but the idea is to start shifting that around a little bit. So, conceptually simple. The challenge that most of us might find in doing this is the rapport part of it. The patterns in themselves are not really challenging. All of us would remember mind reading and cause and effect and operators and all of that. The idea is to get into good rapport first, which takes a few minutes. I mean, just 1 or 2 minutes really. It's not all that challenging. But yes, some amount of practice definitely helps. Okay. First thing is, look at the micro muscle movements of the person, see how the breath is going up and down, try and match that pace, see if you're able to sense the emotion and understand that emotion, not necessarily get carried away by it. So if another person is very angry or extremely sad, understand what it means to be sad or to be angry and then start working with it. And then any of these patterns can be induced really easily. So in fact with Milton, all he used to do was sit across the table and chat. The person who would come in wouldn't even feel that there is a procedure going on. All Milton would do is chat, tell random stories, use metaphors. We'll talk about metaphors and the storytelling part of NLP in the next part. So all he would do was just random talk. He would talk about the weather and the tea and all of that, and the person would come out feeling healed. And there are documented evidence of Milton healing physical injuries through it. It's not just emotional issues, but physically people have walked out of the clinic healed after coming to him. So it is extremely powerful if you're able to hit the right belief. Right. So try it and see how it works for you. And if as for additional reading, there are several. If any of Richard Bandler or John Grinder's books are easily available. Virginia Satir was, she deals largely in family counseling, relationship counseling, and she's done a lot of NLP based work and Milton Model based work. So that's again something that you might want to read up about. Right. And so has Fritz Paul. Fritz Paul's the work is more vast in terms of nature. So thank you.